If you define Gen Z, like the starting position for Gen Z, people who were born in 1996, they are late 20s, like you're talking about 29-year-old, right? If I take myself back as a 29-year-old, I bought my first property when I was, 21, 22, right? Gen Z today don't think about property when they're 20, 21, 22. And I'm choosing my words very carefully. Intentional saving is you are flipping the model over. You're saying, okay, I'm making $15,000 a month. I'm going to take $5,000 and I'm going to call it saving and I'm going to move it into a separate account and I'm not going to touch it. And then the rest of the $10,000, I'm going to create a budget or some sort of methodology where I'm going to spend this intentionally on things that I need and not things that I want, right? And basically that's the mindset. So if you are thinking about saving, save intentionally. Don't save as a residual amount. When you talk about millennials and Gen Z, their wealth score is between $750,000 for millennials and Gen Z only sitting at about, on average, about $60,000 to $70,000, right? So you can see that there is massive disparity between the amount of wealth that these people sit on, right? And the reason, my personal way of thinking is, when you talk about Gen Zs, there is a major wealth shift that's going to happen through baby boomers to Gen X, from Gen X to Gen Y, and from Gen Y to Gen Z, right? And that is the major wealth shift that everyone is talking about right now. They've called it the great wealth transfer in the history. It's about $84 trillion worth of assets that is set to change hands over the next 15 to 20 years. Co-living properties can generate almost $140,000 in passive income and net of $40,000 in passive income after mortgage repayments, and they sit in an average yield of about 10%. Hello and welcome to another episode of Help Me Buy Property Podcast. Today's topic, we are talking about Gen Z. We are going to make or call in a verdict whether Gen Z will be able to afford a property in 2025. Now, before we start talking about the topic in itself, let's do drum roll and bring in Miss Cheryl Leong. Cheryl, how are you today?
I am amazing, Moxin. How are you? And I guess this is the thing that, are we considered Gen Z, Mox? I think we need to define what Gen Z is. I think, anyone that says I was born after 1990, what do you mean? So let's define what Gen Z is, because my kids keep telling me they're Gen Sigma or something.
Sigma, yes. I think that's how it is. So I think it starts from like the silent generations, which is people who were born in 1945 or before. Some of them are still around.
Is that the baby boomers?
No, the baby boomers are 1946 to 1964, which is quite interesting because that's what I used to think. I thought these were baby boomers, but that's not the case. You have silent generations, which is 45 and before. And then you have 1946 to 1964, which are basically the baby boomers. So, my parents, your parents.
My parents, your parents. And I guess the question that we're asking, and Gen Z is your sort of 1996 to 2015. So what are they now? They're in their 30s.
Early 20s, or late 20s, early 30s.
Late 20s.
You have two generations between baby boomers and Gen Z, right? So you have Gen X, which is 1965 to 1976, And these are the people who would be in their mid 40s to 50s. And then you have millennials in Gen Y, who are born from 1977 to 1995. And so these are the people who are in their 30s to 40s.
Yeah.
Or late 20s, early 30s to, 40s. So, yeah.
All right, so we're talking about Gen Z who are in their early 20s. Well, I'd say early 20s. My maths is not serving me well, but to the mid 30s, right? Are they, are we looking at them buying houses or being able to afford to buy their first houses? Because the question is, if they're not already in the market, are they going to be able to enter the market?
Yeah. Look, I mean, if you define Gen Z, like the starting position for Gen Z, like people who were born in 1996, they are late 20s, like you're talking about 29-year-old, right? If I take myself back as a 29-year-old, I bought my first property when I was 21, 22, right? People Gen Z today don't think about property when they're 20, 21, 22. It's a very, and I'm choosing my words very carefully, very, I don't know what to say. Like I would definitely, annoy or offend Gen Z when I say these words, but I think they are very privileged generation. They are people who are, who focus more on experiences, who focus more on, where their life wants to take them, and saving the money is not at the forefront. And even when you talk about some of these things, and some of these people are my clients, when you talk to them, their mindset is purely about, okay, what is the non-conventional way of me making money? And, these are the people who have seen making a lot of money very quickly. Like imagine, like these are the crypto generation, right? This is what you call iGen.
Yes.
Where you have 25 years old and 26 years old who have become millionaires.
Yes.
In 2 years' time, right? There's not like this constant battle of building a business over 10 years, right? 2 years, boom, you're sitting on 2 million, 3 million driving fast cars, right? So you see a lot of these people. These are the people who are also in social media marketing, social influencing. And so for a lot of these people, money comes very easy. They haven't seen those hard yards of, working in a petrol station or doing a cleaning job or you're doing dishwashing. That's not the generation we're talking about. They feel that they are superior to a lot of these things, right? Which is quite interesting. I don't know if you agree to that or not, Cheryl.
Well, I mean, looking back, and I think it's anyone that's Gen Z or younger, we're definitely in a different sort of environment, and an era where technology has allowed access to so many things. Traveling is so much easier. The internet has allowed us to make all sorts of money from different things. You've got YouTube stars, you've got all these influencers. Even Amazon drop shipping, like this business they've grown up in an environment where you can, like it's to a certain extent, they've been able to see, and it's not a bad thing, that you don't need a conventional career to make
or
money.
a degree.
Yeah. And they've grown up in an era where they've been told and they can see that they can travel they can travel and work from anywhere. I mean, they've experienced COVID as well. And so a lot of people are digital nomads. They are your entrepreneurs. And so, I think there's a real shift in this need for ownership. Well, one, ownership in property. One, whether there's a real need, and two, whether they feel there's a need to generate income from property as well. Because, we've grown up in an era where, and even with our parents, property is solid, it's reliable, you can see it, you can feel it. They've grown up in an era where there's crypto, there's all sorts of different forms
NFTs and all of these.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, I'd like to sort of almost sort of challenge that to go, well, do they have to buy property to begin with?
It's true.
Right. And whether then they go, well, actually I can, if I decide to buy property, I'm going to buy REITs or whatever instead, or I'm going to do fragmented ownership where I don't need to buy a whole property and so on, or I'll just trade it on crypto, or whatever that might be. I think there's so many options there for the Gen Z and beyond, that property is going to become less of a need to have for a lot of people. But I guess the question is for those that want to get into the space where there's still a little bit of that traditional need for ownership and security, or leveraging property in the long run. The question is then, what are the challenges they're going to face? Are they, is it impossible to get in? Or are there some solutions? Is the government helping with anything? I think those are the things we can
Definitely
talk about, because I do think that whole generation from then Gen Z onwards is going to be, they're going to have a totally different view to property.
Don't get yourself taken on a ride by property spookers, so-called property investment advisors, or buyer's agents who are selling house and land packages or off-the-plan properties or apartments. Get yourself a copy of this book called The Millennial's Guide to Property Investing. This book is not just for millennials. The title suggests, but it's actually the most advanced way of investing in property. This book will relate to your clients, your colleagues, and other business owners. There are so many property spookers out there who have come out of the woodwork over the last 3 to 5 years. And there is so much misinformation out there that I had to write a book about all the F-ups that people can actually avoid in order to be super successful in the property investment journey. Some of these are really easy to identify, but they are so costly to fix once these mistakes are made. So it's a short book, it's easy to read, it has a lot of stories, it has a lot of examples, and it is a true guide for people who wants to do it themselves. My name is Moxin Reza. This is my story, and a lot of you will relate to parts of this story if you're not born in the riches and if you're trying to build a property portfolio that can last generations and help you improve your lifestyle along the way. So I give you a chance to come out there and have a read. Be kind, stay safe, keep smiling, keep investing, and please do check out the book. Definitely. I think it's an interesting point that you make there, right? That a lot of Gen Zs, when you really think about them, they are not in the game of, generational wealth, right? Yes, they want to become wealthy, but they're not in the game of, passing on the bet and creating generational wealth, leaving that money behind, right?
No.
And that's why it makes total sense.
Yeah.
That from their perspective, they'll go into volatile investments because it's more about now. They like living in the present, right?
Yeah.
They don't want to think about the future or go into the future. And there is a reason behind this, right? And there's a really, really strong reason behind this. Like if you think about Gen Zs or millennials to a certain extent as well, right? If you take a step back, and these are interesting facts, right? Because, I was crunching some numbers there. You would have thought that baby boomers would have the most accumulated wealth right now because, of course, they've been here longer than any one of us. But when you talk about asset accumulation, the most significant amount of housing in Australia is held actually by Gen X, which is, people who are born in 1965 to 1976. And so on average, they hold a housing of about $1.3 million, followed very closely by baby boomers at about $1.3 million, whereas there is massive experience difference, right? And when you talk about millennials and Gen Z, their wealth score is between $750,000 for millennials, and Gen Z only sitting at about, on average, about $60,000 to $70,000, right?
Yeah.
So you can see that there is massive disparity between the amount of wealth that these people sit on, right? And the reason, my personal way of thinking is when you talk about iGens or, Centennials or Gen Zs, there is a major wealth shift that they are expecting that is going to happen through baby boomers to Gen X, from Gen X to Gen Y, and from Gen Y to Gen Z, right? And that is the major wealth shift that everyone is talking about right now. They've called it the great wealth transfer in the history. It's about $84 trillion worth of assets that is set to change hands over the next 15 to 20 years. And that's a big shift, right? Of, money changing hands. And so primarily, if you think about where this money is going, $72 trillion or worth of assets is basically traveling through Generation X and millennials and Gen Z. And so when I say these people are privileged, there are 3 generations worth of people who have been holding and thinking about, wealth transfer and wealth generation and passing on the baton.
Yeah.
And this last generation be like, well, I'm going to get all of this anyway.
You know, you think about this whole concept of here's an inheritance, or we're coming from such a different generation where back, you know, when our grandparents or our great grandparents, they went through wars, they went through, you know, there's a lot of scarcity. So the scarcity mindset was around, I need to be able to set things up for the generations after me, because I don't want them to suffer like we did. But like our kids aren't going to suffer.
It's like football cards selling for $300,000, right? You know, go figure, right?
Yeah.
And like, I was having this discussion with one of my mentors as well, right? And they were like, you know, the Great Plague or the massive recession or the World War, you know, II and all of these things, right? There was a massive cycle of, you know, a lot of people going through that turmoil as, holy shit, like, you know, we've been through this is so hard.
Yes.
And then you go through an event like COVID where Gen Z was there and they had a lot of fun. Like, you know, if you really think about it, they came out the other way making more money, having more, wealth on hand, spending more money. Do you know what I mean? Like the mindset is so different, right?
Yes.
They went through this massive, you know, event, you know, it's a once in a lifetime event like World War II or the Great Plague or the Spanish flu. And so you have COVID and you see 2022 COVID ending and people were partying, right? They were celebrating and, you know,
they were traveling. Everyone wanted to travel. And it got people thinking, well, I need to live out my best life. And COVID wasn't necessarily all rainbows. It wasn't all rainbows and butterflies. It definitely not. It was very challenging, but I think it shifted a lot of people's thinking in terms of what are their priorities. And so a lot of people left stable jobs to be able to find alternative ways to work and things like that. And I guess that's one of the things that's going to, you know, impact and make it challenging for those who are looking to purchase property to go, well, you don't necessarily have stable income, not necessarily, and particularly if you've set up businesses as an entrepreneur. And unless you've sort of, you know, done the right structuring and everything else over the last few years, then your serviceability is going to be impacted, you know, and that reliability, you know, your funds going into your super, that's going to be impacted.
Yeah. Or there are these small businesses that can produce and run quite quickly.
Yeah.
And there is so much of, you know, what I say is skill-based jobs that are being created by themselves. So they're not dependent on some big business providing them job. You know, they can create that. You know, there is consulting work, there is Fiverr and all of these freelancing work. There is so much stuff that people can do in order to get to where they want to get. You see a lot of these people, like when I think about my parents and my grandparents, you know, they stick to a place and they basically make it work, right? I see a lot of, millennials and Gen Z even putting things on the cards like, okay, I'm going to move countries and I'm going to make my money in Australia or US market, but I'm going to live in Fiji or I'm going to live in Bali because it's cheaper to live there. All of these things, you know, that changes the dynamics completely, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
The most interesting thing for me out of all of this, and we are going to come back and talk a bit about the issues that they face, because this is all the good side of things. You're going to talk a bit about the bad side of things too, is that every time the whole of the world been through a major event like World War or, you know, recession, etc., there was a time of almost like 5 to 8 years or 10 years of people's, you know, confidence coming back. It took a lot longer. When you talk about COVID, you know, you were at the lowest inflation levels, lowest interest rates, and then boom, like it just went, you know, crazy, right? Because of the realization that, hey, life is so short and I want to enjoy as much as possible. And so people just went out and traveled and started spending, and that's why you see inflation. Yes, you know, there were some supply issues, etc. I'm trying to oversimplify this. But there was so much that happened at the same time as well, right? So, yeah, it's very interesting dynamics. And so let's unpack the issues, Cheryl, that these people face when it comes to property investing.
All right, let's pick 5. All right, let's see how we go. 5 of the issues. Well, one would be saving for deposits. As the value of properties increase in Australia, what are we now? We've got sort of averages around $800 to $1 million Australia-wide now. So that's big money, right? That's
massive. Yeah, it's like $160,000.
Yeah. So if you're looking at a 20% deposit, it's $160,000. What are people earning? What are the average wages? Because property prices have gone up. Wages haven't gone up at the same, trajectory.
100%. Yeah, definitely. I think someone, quoted me some of these examples. I was talking to a land developer, and he mentioned to me that, the house used to cost about $75,000 in 1985 when he bought his first home, and the deposit was only $15,000. And his earnings at that time in 1985 when he came, he was earning, between 50 to 60. I mean, he was in a high paying job. I think he quoted a lot bigger than this, but that's where the average earnings sat, right? So you could, if you didn't spend any money for the whole year, for example, you could buy a house from your money, right? Whatever you were earning. And so if you take the same example and take in today's world, your on average earning is 120. You would need to not eat and live for at least 8 or 9 years for you to buy a house, right? Basically, if you think about it that way.
Yeah.
If you think about it, and all of this happened in a span of what, I would say 30, 35 years, right? So if you give yourself another 30 years, this number would be doubled. And so you would have to fast for another 15 years probably to buy the first property, right? If you really wanted to buy it off cash, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I completely agree. I think saving the deposit in times like today where everything is so fast and so driven and people, appreciate experiences and travel and want to eat out more and Uberization of everything.
Yes.
There's 10,000, commitments that you have on your Afterpay and Zip Pay and PayPal.
Netflix and YouTube Premium and all of that. It all adds up. So saving is going to be a challenge. And we're saying these are challenges, right? We're going to highlight the challenges, but we're not saying that this is the end all because we're eternal optimists, aren't we? We're just saying these are the challenges, but we're going to look at what are the people doing to be able to overcome this. So savings is a challenge. Affordability, it's at its lowest. It's 30-year low. Australia, particularly the big cities, are at the top of one of the most expensive cities in the world to live in. So, people are going, well, how can I even afford, even if I could save for a deposit, my income might not even allow me to service that particular loan. Because, you're talking about, well, not necessarily on a single wage either, right? More than likely, it'll have to be on 2 wages. So it will be either yourself, a partner, you might have to share as well. Someone who is on their own, unless you're in some $250,000 income, and you're wanting to live in the cities, it's going to be challenging, or you're going to have to, look at purchasing small apartments.
Definitely. Yeah. No. And I think good segue from there, when you talk about housing affordability at its lowest, the interest rates are at its highest. And so while they can't save.
It's all doom and gloom here today. Don't worry, we're stopping at 5. We're not going to keep going. So it's like we all jump off the edge of a cliff, right?
Yes. But I mean, if you really think about, the macroeconomic conditions, these people don't want to live frugally, price to income ratios, are all over the place. And it's harder because of all of these circumstances as well, that the macroeconomics does not really help them in entering into the market as well, right? So, and for me, there's a lot of misinformation and over-information out there. There's so much information out there for people that they go into this analysis paralysis mode, or almost like handbrake decision mode. And I had a pleasure of, working with some of these, Gen Zs. And it's so hard to get them to make a decision because, they always find new information and they'll go back into analysis paralysis mode, right?
Sure.
But I mean, it's great, right? They're evidence-based decision making, but it's also important to understand when it comes, you might not have all of the information. You don't need to have 100% of the information to make the decision sometimes, right? And so a lot of that basically plays a lot as well, where you have misinformation or over information. And so they just get scared of debt and like, oh, I can't service this debt, or I just don't have enough information to make a call. So I think
so they don't take action either, and then you get to a point where you're like, it's all too hard. I might as well go live my life and spend $20,000 on
100%
on travel and instead, and go, I've lived my life. If I died tomorrow, I'll be happy. It's fine.
Yes. Well, instant gratification, right? Basically, that's what you said, right? Earlier, that, that's what they feel, right? They look at crypto and people making millions out of crypto and they are like, oh, why would I invest in property and sit here for 5 years or 10 years where I don't even know I would be in Australia or not, right? Or I might be living in UK, right? So, yeah. I think the competition it's an unfair competition, right? You're competing with like baby boomers and millennials, seen some of the biggest growth cycles in history, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's an unfair competition. It's like a 2-year-old fighting a boxing match with a 30-year-old, right?
What are they competing with? Being able to afford those properties? Like, are you talking
everything, right? When you talk about income levels, millennials and baby boomers are a lot better. When you talk about, wealth, they're sitting on a lot more wealth, and, money makes money ultimately, right? So, and so when you talk about millennials and baby boomers, they have been one of those astute investors who have at least held 1 or 2 properties. And so those properties have grown quite a lot in value.
Yes.
There's a lot of wealth that they are competing against, right?
Yeah.
So not just experience, but also wealth. And so it's a very unfair sort of competition. Whereas if you look even like 10 years ago or 15 years ago, that competition was not that unfair, right?
Yeah.
You would see that the gap between the two was not that bad. I remember, in 2008 when I bought my first property at 350, I remember my uncle was buying a property at around 450, 500. So there's not massive difference, right?
Yeah, right.
Whereas,
okay, so you're
does that make
saying,
sense? Like I'm buying a property now at, 1.5, 1.6 million. And there is nothing at $1 million mark, right? Everything is basically at that price point, right?
Yeah. And so again, I get what you're saying there, because I was like, what are we competing against? But the fact is that, well, your boomers then would be buying things in the 2 millions. They're sort of
exactly
millions as opposed to $50,000 to $100,000 difference.
Correct.
Back in the day when we were young, imagine buying something at $350,000. Oh my goodness.
Yes.
And that was big money for us at the time.
100%.
And so just looking at that and again, being able to note that is sort of is it instilling some level of FOMO in there going, oh no, I can't, how do I get to that point? But we'll talk about how to be able to make sure that you can, stay in your lane as well. And it's not a bad thing.
Yes, definitely.
All right. Last one. What's some of the challenges?
I think the supply chain issues definitely is a big one as well, with the volatility around construction pricing and the builders going bust and the government's, penalizing all of these people who are trying to hold on to properties, while the government is more focused on penalizing baby boomers and millennials or Gen X to, back off so that these people can come in.
Yeah.
Every time they bring out a policy, it actually favors them instead of favoring the millennial or Gen Zs, right? So no matter how hard anyone tries, these supply chain issues are, overpowering, and that basically, stops them from entering into. And so, there is always these small opportunities for them to enter. And if they don't enter and they go into this analysis process, they miss out on those opportunities, right? All the time. Like the government would open up a 2% or a 5% deposit scheme, and then all of a sudden the builder puts the prices up, right?
Yeah.
Or stamp duty concessions, the government offers stamp duty concessions and the prices go up. And we're like, oh, okay, I'm always chasing my tail, right?
Okay, well, doom and gloom, I think we set out a few there. Now let's give our Gen Z some tools and some optimism to be able to jump in and go, it's not the end of the world. Okay, the challenges, but the great thing with challenges is that they're character building. It just makes you want to just think creatively and look at the resources that are available to you. All right, so let's talk about savings. We talked about savings for a deposit. What are some options there?
Look, I think the biggest thing is intentional saving. I think that's the big thing. That's what I always talk to with my clients too. There is this mindset of a lot of people that they save what's left. And so you might make, say, $15,000 or $10,000 a month, and they'll go spend. Whatever is left is my saving, right?
Yeah.
And so some months it's great, some months it's zero, some months it's negative, right? Because you don't, you're left with nothing. Intentional saving is you are flipping the model over. You're saying, okay, I'm making $15,000 a month. I'm going to take $5,000 and I'm going to call it saving, and I'm going to move it into a separate account, and I'm not going to touch it. And then the rest of the 10,000, I'm going to create a budget or some sort of methodology where I'm going to spend this intentionally on things that I need and not things that I want. Right. And basically that's the mindset. So if you are thinking about saving, save intentionally. Don't save as a residual amount.
Yeah.
And that works really, really. And you don't have to save forever. Like you don't have to live through. You're not talking about you living on baked beans and, spaghetti or noodles. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is measure where the money is going, follow the money, and be a bit more respectful about it. And you just need to do that.
Yeah.
You create that discipline for the first 2 to 3 years so that, you can get ahead of the curve, and then the wealth would start coming through and the wealth would start helping you.
And noting not everyone earns 15,000 a year, but whatever it is, it's more around being able to put aside 5%, 10%, whatever small amount it is. And if anyone's read Barefoot Investor, he talks about buckets. Like treat your money in that sense. Have even different accounts where you're transferring the money that way. Lots of really clever ways where even small amounts of money, you can put it into particular apps or softwares. Like, for example, we use Raiz, R-A-I-Z. And even at my kids, $50 a fortnight or whatever, it goes into their Raiz account. It's gone up 20% in the last year. My son thinks I'm stealing from him because he keeps saying, it's my money, why don't you give it to me? And I said, by the time you're 18, you'll be very happy. But it's earning some sort of an income there. So put that away, put that into your investments, put that into something and lock it away. Don't look at it. Like, don't touch it. It doesn't need to be a big amount, right? But be, like I said, be intentional. And just like anything else, if you are saving for a deposit and if it's 100 grand, it's 150,000, those are big dollars, right? But they're not impossible. It just means that you do need to be mindful of where you're spending the rest of your money.
Definitely.
And so you go, well, I have to rent, Moxin, Cheryl, I have to rent. Okay, well, what are some options for renting? Could you find, more? Are there other ways? Could you be house sitting? Could you, could you house sit? Could you be living in a co-living space, a really nice one? There are lots of different ways now to do things more cost effectively. It doesn't need to be the traditional way. And I think, so there's, you could continue to live with mum and dad if you're okay. Buy yourself a little tiny house if you want to.
Put it in the backyard.
And put it in the backyard. Once you're done with that, then they can rent it out, whichever. There's so many different ways you can save for a deposit. It just comes down to, bit by bit, have that little bit of a target. Challenge yourself to be creative.
Definitely.
Because we can all come up with all these creative ideas. Like find some way to earn additional income, whether it's Uber, whether it's drop shipping, whether it's doing an online course. And this is the part where it is really cool. It's like you can be an entrepreneur at the same time. And, those are the things that you have control of. Right? The things that then, in terms of, or maybe reducing your deposit, is looking at what other schemes are out there from the government. Also, you know about what's out there more than I do. So
I think, if I just want to add one more thing, when you talk about second job or passive income, people tend to, always think and look down upon. I think it's an amazing way to, fast track your savings, right? That second job is your saving, right? And so if you want to live a much more flashy life, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay, you want to go out and party, that's okay. But then work even more harder during the week, right? You can. You're in your bloody 20s, right? There's nothing wrong with that, having two jobs where you're using the second job and saving all of that money on the side, right? Or that extra business that you run on the side. That could help you fast track some of that savings on the side for investment.
And here's the thing, you can leverage people, right? You've got people, I said, or, I've got a whole business who leverages virtual assistants. And so it's around like, well, what are the things that I can create that I can leverage someone else?
Definitely.
And this can be a little bit tricky for people who are so used to be having an employee mindset because you're so used to doing everything yourself, as opposed to going, how do I switch it over? Who, not what? Who can I leverage to be able to do more of what I want to be able to do? So you can have 1, 2, 3 other businesses, side hustles, but you don't necessarily have to be the person there all the time.
100%. Yeah. And so to your question, Cheryl, first on buyer schemes, there's heaps of schemes, right? There is no stamp duty schemes that, South Australia has and Victoria have. There is a lot of opportunities in off the plan space where if you're trying to enter into the market, don't go and buy apartments, but at least, you can buy something cheap and reasonable that is settling in 3 years' time. And, you can aim towards getting towards that deposit, but also like 2%, 5% deposits that the government offers, right? There are so many solutions out there where you don't need a deposit to buy a house. And this is interesting because again, who, not what, comes back to that, right? So there are companies like Bricklets where they'll give you 20% deposit if you have the servicing available, and they'll take ownership of 20% of your house and you can pay them out in 2 years or 3 years time. And so you can save the money, but enter into the property market right now. So there are various non-conventional ways for you to enter into the market. But just make sure that the discipline is there for you to come up with a deposit, but then also leverage all of these schemes that the banks, the governments, and a lot of these private investors are offering you, because entering the market is the prime thing that you need to consider. It's not so much about saving that big deposit or buying that $1 million property. It's about getting into the market as fast and as quick as possible, right?
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So that's deposit. Lots of different ways. I'd love to hear people's thoughts and share, what are the clever things that you've been doing to be able to fast track the saving of your deposits as well. All right. The next part, we talk about affordability, and we can't necessarily do anything about affordability in that aspect. However, let's look at what are the different lending products that are out there to be able to allow you to get into the market with smaller deposits.
Yes. Well, I mean, the first and the foremost that it's the easiest to, leverage is the bank of mom and dads, right? Of course, your mom and dads are Gen X and the baby boomers. And so, of course, they have a lot of wealth sitting with them. And so how do you leverage their equity in fast tracking your journey towards acquiring property? So the mom of dad, or partnering with friends, or partnering with parents in a trust, I think those are some of amazing lending solutions where you don't need to come up with a deposit. You're leveraging someone else's money to enter into the market. You're just taking the commitment of paying down the loan, right? So you're taking the obligation of say, hey, I'll pay this, but help me get into the market. And so it's a massive untapped market. And a lot of people don't even know about how do you go around doing this, but there are solutions available where people actually take you through this route of, okay, how do you use mom and dad's bank and how can you set up trusts? And because you want to ensure that their money is protected as well, because you are playing with their retirement funds, right? So how do you go around doing that as well? So you need to do it in a proper way that you're not overexposing them to the bank, where the bank has sought personal guarantees over their whole portfolios. And I've seen that time and time again. Someone is, too aggressive in going out there and putting their parents' assets online and giving personal guarantees on some of these things. And then the bank comes back knocking on the door, claiming their pound of flesh, right? So, just be careful when you're going down this path as well.
And if you're purchasing investments, we talked quite a lot about the rent vesting side of things and the pros and cons. LMI, don't be afraid of lender's mortgage insurance, because there are some there's some tax benefits in doing that as well. Speak to your accountant. You are paying a particular fee, but you can
use a lower deposit to enter into the market. And there is a lot of banks who would take a no LMI product as well, or if you are in certain occupations like nurses or doctors or accountants, where loans of no LMI and the minimum deposit is available to you. So you don't have to deposit on government schemes or, offering equity share in your property. You can go down that path of paying even no LMI, but, going down the path of acquiring a property with a very low deposit and paying no LMI.
Yeah. Whilst we're on this topic and noting that we've talked about how quite a few people in this space may be entrepreneurs as well, because if they've quit the boring 9 to 5, and noting that the lenders are aware of these sort of more entrepreneurial type individuals wanting to borrow. So there are products out there that allow you might have to pay for a higher interest rate, but you have no or low doc loans. So there are products available out there that will allow you a level of servicing and borrowing capacity.
Definitely.
Generally, you do have to have a larger deposit, but it comes down to what is possible. There's so many things out there. Like I said, bricklet. When I first, actually, we were one of the first properties on bricklet many years ago. But it's changed quite a bit now. So it's got a level of shared ownership. You sort of need to be able to go, well, if I want to get in, what are the creative ways to do it? And am I willing to actually let go of something to be able to gain something as well?
Yeah. What about all of these strategic partnerships, partnering with friends, partnering with parents, partnering with SMSF and personal? What do you think about that, Cheryl?
This is such an interesting one. And definitely, I'm not saying it's impossible. I'd say definitely consider it and make sure you have all forms of exits.
Yes.
Right?
Implications and the consequences.
There's so many, especially, friends and family, and
siblings. You see so many stories about siblings, right?
Yeah. And you might go in with the best intentions, but you just never know. Everyone's situation is going to change. I mean, we've had situations where we've purchased with siblings and it's turned out well, luckily. And we've had situations where it's not that things haven't turned out well, but circumstances has changed and you've had to sell property or whatever that might be. And so just be aware that it adds another level of complexity. But ensure, like if you are purchasing a property, and look at what the entity is that you're buying it in, and allow a level of flexibility for people to go in and out easily, without major consequences to you.
Definitely.
Note when you are partnering with people that extracting the equity out of property is going to be a bit tricky.
Yes.
Again,
yes.
not impossible, just trickier.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I think the biggest learning for me when you're going into contracts or partnerships with friends or siblings is that you are way too early in your career life cycle as well, right? You're in your mid-20s, and you and your sibling might be earning similar amount of money right now. But give yourself 5 years and 6 years and you might be earning more, or they might be earning more, or you decide to get married first and then you want to buy a place to live in. And now all of this becomes very, very messy, right? Because now you have a third person, and you have your money locked in and you're forcing them to sell. So thinking about exit strategies before you get into some of these things, while it's like it works, of course it works. Each of the siblings bring in 15,000, 20,000, you combine 3 of them and you have a deposit there. It definitely works. You just need to make sure that you're using proper contracts, even though that they're siblings, you're making sure that you have proper exit strategies or exit clauses in place. You make sure that you use proper structures. So you've thought this through as to, okay, what needs to happen if X, Y, and Z gets triggered, right? If I am getting married, or if I want an out, or what price point would I get an out at? Is it a market valuation? Is it a mutually agreed price? Or do we get a real estate to give us a valuation? All of these, think this through, seek help before you go down this path, right?
Yeah, there's so many things. My preference is, if you can avoid it, avoid it. Because there's so many implications from what happens when, you have children or you pass away and all these sorts of things. Like, you need to make sure that all your wills and estates and all that need to be planned well also. In saying that, I mean, there's options like fractional ownership, which has a lot less complexity around there. You don't have any sort of relationship with the other investors that are part of a larger investment. So you could have a look at that to see if that works for you. Ooh, I like the idea of, let's talk about super.
Interesting. Yes.
What can people do with super, particularly when, we're talking about people who are still fairly young, and I say young compared to...
Yeah. So they wouldn't have a lot of money in super. When you talk about like mid-20s, they might have maybe 50 or 60,000 in super if they're lucky, nothing more than this. And so by themselves, they can't do much. But again, if you join forces within super and bring that together, then, definitely they can achieve more as well, right? I think it's also important when you talk about super in itself too, is that, smaller price points is your best friend as as an investor who was trying with a smaller deposit who was trying to enter into the market. You don't need that $1 million to $1 million property, right? You're looking at 350, 400, 450K price point.
Yeah.
And so even if you're thinking about rent vesting, and so super, you would basically go down that path. I personally feel that, if you are partnering with someone, then super makes a lot more sense than doing it in your own personal name, because it's almost like secluded. It's kept outside of a lot of this. You can choose as to how much do you want to bring it within your SMSF. Again, please don't constitute this as financial advice, tax advice. But, a lot of accountants, a lot of financial planners would say, oh, you only have $50,000. You don't need an SMSF. You shouldn't get an SMSF. But hey, if you have 4 of you with, 50,000 each, now you have enough to basically go down and build a portfolio within super as well, right? And you can keep it very secluded without impacting your personal lifestyle or personal, personal financial well-being as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Any final little tips for our Gen Zs before, we want to make sure and feel that they can take action and do something now and not feel like it's the end of the world?
I think for me, if I, hindsight is a beautiful thing. And I always tend to see what was I doing when I was in my 20s and when I was in my mid 20s and mid 30s. The idea is to take action, and that's what matters, right? Yes, you'll make a lot of mistakes. Yes, you will not have money to use a buyer's agent. You will try to be as delicate as possible and trying to use a lot of the money yourself and try to reinvest. And that's okay. It's okay to make mistakes. The faster you get into the market and learn and come out and do it again, the faster you'll get into, building wealth or creating something of your own, right? Because, the whole idea of investing premises back towards the compounding nature, right? And so the earlier you start, the more compounding you get, right? So, it's just a matter of starting at some point. What about you, Cheryl?
Yeah, I'd say absolutely. I think it's having that level of, I've got a goal, this is what I want to work towards, and just chip at it a little bit at a time. Stay consistent and determined, not be swayed by it. Get advice. Get advice. You don't need, we've talked about this in previous episodes. You have larger borrowing capacity when you are buying an investment, and less for a need for a deposit as well. So don't feel that ownership needs to be your first home, but be able to think outside the box as well.
Definitely. Golden words, Cheryl. I think having an A team in place definitely helps you. And so bring the right A team. If you have stories of your own, and if you're a Gen Z who have managed to build a portfolio of their own or got into the market with other conventional strategies, we would love to hear from you. If you want to drop it into comments or reach out to us at info@helpmebuy.com.au. Thank you for listening to us today. Take care, stay safe, keep smiling, keep investing. This is Cheryl and Moss checking out. Adios.
See you later. Bye.